What is up, guys? We are back. And Brandon, we are back today with somebody that have came on into the first season, the OG guest of our Lifting Nerds podcast, one of the greatest lifters the world has ever seen.
I don't know about
Yeah.
that.
But
That's a lie.
I would say one of my longtime mentors, Brian Miner. We have him here today. We are here today with we have a very fun discussion today as we are going to talk about one of his sports, which is powerlifting. So before we get into it, Brian did join on to Team 3DMJ, a very, very proud group that in the natural bodybuilding and powerlifting community and evidence-based community here. We also know that Brian has been lifting a lot of years. He's been stepped into both of these sports. So as you know, we know Eric Helms has said, you get to talk about yourself like an hour now, Brian. So it's gonna be fun for you. So why don't you, Brian? Why don't you introduce to all of our, because a lot of people may know you as a powerlifter slash bodybuilder. A lot of people know that you've achieved tremendous condition for your bodybuilding career, but maybe a little bit more about your powerlifting career.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for having me on again. I think this will be a fun discussion. So, the powerlifting side, the first meet I did was 2011, and it was right before like my second prep season. So I did a show 2010, and then I did my second season in 2012, and I was actually working with Berto at that point, and so we did a meet. I think it was like at the end of 2011 here in Colorado. I did a meet. He wasn't out here yet, but it was just like the state meet. Didn't really know what to expect. But I think what originally got me into powerlifting was sort of something that probably wouldn't hook me in now if given the same information. But a while back, I mean, not too long ago, like the idea of powerlifting and just like getting stronger, like had this like very high correlation with hypertrophy. And it does to a point. But it kind of depends on what kind of training you're doing. But the idea was like, okay, you can be strong and you can be, big, and powerlifting, squats and deadlifts are like these meat and potatoes exercises. Like if you get really strong at those, like your legs are going to be huge. Your, posterior chain is going to be really developed. And, I think there's some truth to that, but I think, now it's like I stuck with it because I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the competitive outlet that it provided. And it's something that it's a different, I think, mentality than bodybuilding, because on bodybuilding, you can't control who shows up, and a lot of your like the game day performance it's like all the work's already done at that point, for the most part, outside of just posing and presentation and stuff. So it felt more like a sport. Powerlifting did. And so I enjoyed that. And then I just kind of stuck with it and used, similar structure. I included the big three, and I still do, within my training. The dose is kind of dependent on, where I'm at in the training cycle. But, I've since then, realized, a long time ago, and have kind of transitioned my training more, when it is bodybuilding focused, it's quite a bit less squat, bench, and deadlift, and more like accessory movements that I might be able to, might be better options, better tools for the objective that I'm trying to reach. But, and it's not to say squat, bench, and deadlift are bad exercises. I mean, I think I put on a lot of muscle through powerlifting. But I also think like if I would have just done bodybuilding, maybe on paper, I could have made a little bit more progress, with more, like, if you want to call it optimal exercise selection. Um, but one thing that I think it did provide is just sort of that progressive mentality in the gym. Like it just provided structure. And I think that's one thing that a lot of bodybuilders don't have is like structure to their training. And so I think it made kind of the back then kind of the evidence based side of the community a little bit more in tune with their own training rather than just going in and you know seeking a pump, for example, and leaving. So since it's been 6 years since I did a meet, so like I don't really consider myself an active power lifter, but I do plan to compete again. A lot of it's just been life, busy with kids and family, and I did that prep, and then my last prep in 2017. So, and that was actually the last time I competed. I did my last meet in, I think, March of 2017, and then started prep right after that. So, I did a lot of meets between like 2012 to 2017, though. So, eager to get back into it. I'm not, I haven't felt in a rush really at all. I want to make sure that, like, to be honest, I don't really have a huge desire to do it unless I feel like I can, break new ground and PR on the lifts. Like, I don't want to do it just to do it, because a lot of it's just the self-satisfaction of reaching a goal that you set out to do, so and just working around little injuries here and there has kind of stalled me, in the past in some degree. And I've never really had a prep that's gone like perfect, a powerlifting meet prep. So I'd like to go at least one more under my belt, and then go from there. But if I had to pick one, it would definitely be bodybuilding still.
Nice. Wow, that's a lot of info, man. But now I am going to dig up some dirt on you.
Okay.
Now, it's not intentional, just to get out where it's not intentional, but I was just Googling your name.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things came up was openpowerlifting.org.
Mm-hmm.
And I found you. It's got all your lifts right here. And it's got all the competitions and so placements, feds, location. And the furthest you've ever went was, where's GA?
GA.
Yeah, where's GA? Now, OH is Ohio. I think that's
Yeah.
CO is Colorado, where you are.
Yeah.
PA, that's in Pennsylvania.
Oh, Georgia. Yeah. So there was nationals, USAPL
Yeah, that was
nationals
War
in
Nationals.
Atlanta. Yeah.
Everything you've competed was a raw is for equipment. So you have basically you're just not working with anything. Basically, it's just raw lifts, and you're all in the 93 class. Is that correct?
I did well. Yes, the raw still allows like knee sleeves and a belt and wrist straps, but in powerlifting, there's like single-ply, multi-ply. Like there's knee wraps allowed. So knee sleeves, wrist straps, a belt. That's still considered raw powerlifting. But I did one meet is an 83 on the, and I don't know if it's on there or not, but it was
It is, yeah.
it was in the middle of
Yeah.
prep. So I guess that March one wasn't my last meet. So I think it was like July of 2017 or something like
Yeah,
that.
that's correct. Yeah, that's correct.
And that was mostly just for fun. Like it was like, okay, let's see how I can do when I'm almost in stage shape, and it was like as expected, not very well, in comparison. So it was fun though. Made for some cool photos at least. So that was cool.
Insane numbers. So what we see here is it pretty much plays it. Your personal best was your squat was 250, bench 180, and deadlift at 297.5. So almost three of these are all in kilos, by the way. If you want the pounds, yeah, I'll do that later. But it also says, a total of 727.5. That's your personal best, up to point. We don't know. Next time you might break that record. Who knows? And then there's also this thing called dots. We talked a little bit off air about this. So like just for me, I don't know what it means, but what does dots actually mean?
So dots is like at powerlifting meets, usually there's like a um, there's weight classes, and then whoever, regardless of where you weigh in your weight class, if you total the most, you'll win your class. So what some meets will offer like an overall best lifter award, and that's based off of like relative strength. And there's different formulas out there. One, probably the longest standing one has been Wilks, but it's sort of phased out now. I think there's still some federations maybe in Australia using it, but DOTS is just, I don't know all the inner workings of how it's calculated, but I know it takes into account the division that the lifter's in, gender, takes into account like records for that weight class, and I think where like the top handful of athletes are in that class, and it creates coefficients. So you can kind of, it takes into account like relative to your weight class, how'd you do, and then helps, your weight lifted is obviously a component of that. And so combines all of this into a formula in an effort to provide a score, a DOT score, where you can actually compare lifters across different genders and weight classes in order to see, who the strongest pound for pound or kilo for kilo lifter is. And it's not perfect, but it's something that's been, I think useful, when comparing different classes. I know Wilks, it was kind of biased against like middleweights, like the largest, kind of population of lifters. And I use middleweight instead of weight classes, but just sort of like the middle of the bell curve, in terms of overall population, it tended to underrepresent them a little bit. So DOTS is an effort to kind of make things slightly more level with, more updated data, with the weight classes.
Yeah, I've actually found this website where to calculate your dots. It's just kind of it's like a sort of it generates this equation. I don't know how, but man, my dots are so low. It's so shit. It's
It's
unbelievably shit.
I think, even my best day is a 93 lifter, and I think he said it's 727. Like that wouldn't be remotely competitive at the national level at this point. And it wasn't then either. It may have been in like 2012, maybe. But I know like 2014 was the first nationals I did. In Lane Norton was in the 93s, and he won. And I don't know what it is in kilos, but in pounds. So 727 in pounds, what I totaled, I think is like 1603. And then Lane totaled, I want to say 1725 or a little over 1700.
Yeah.
So even then, like the talent pool was, growing, and now it's just ridiculous.
Yeah.
So that's one thing about powerlifting is you have to do it because, and the same thing with bodybuilding, really. Like it's like if somebody knew they didn't have the genetics for bodybuilding, but they still decided to compete, it would be like for their own, enjoyment. And that's what it needs to be for powerlifting if you're not, one of the freaks that are out there, because, I'm not, unless I'm like a Masters 2 competitor, like in my, 50s or whatever the cutoff is for that. I'm not going to be winning any high level meets anymore, but I could, like, there's still numbers I would like to hit in a meet, just because I know if I can, put together the training to do it, like I think I'm capable of it. And at that point, it's like, okay, I check the box that I want to be, and then I can kind of move on. But yeah, it's just some things just feel a little bit unfulfilled in that sport, and I do enjoy it, but it does. It's the time element of of the training that's kind of a big limiting factor for me. It's like powerlifting training sessions, especially as a meet approaches. I mean, they can be 2.5 hours pretty easily, and it's like, I have other priorities, outside of this. So
yeah. Do you think it's progressed so much in powerlifting just because there's more competitors now, or do you think it's just the coaching has gotten so much better that they've been able to like kind of optimize people's programs?
I mean, I think that's a good question. I think it's definitely both. I would say it's probably more so that the talent pool has gotten significantly bigger because, I mean, programming is hasn't been like any like radical discoveries like, oh, we should have been doing this the whole time, you know. So it's like it's more like refining, you know, programming, you know, strategies over time. um but I do think, you know, there's the programming has gotten better, you know, and there's, you know, a lot more you know, knowledgeable coaches now than there were. So I think there's a, you know, it's a combination. It's like there's only so many athletes a coach can take on, and so once you get somebody who's not in the sport but's like genetically, you know, going to do well if they stick with it, it's like if there's more coach, you know, qualified coaches, you know, it kind of plays hand in hand. You know, they'll have access to that. So but yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it is like, I don't have the data off the top of my head, but I'd be curious to see what like the like USAPL registration was like in 2012 to what it is now. I mean, it's astronomically higher now. So it's like I kind of got into it when raw powerlifting like was just starting to kind of take off a little bit. Um, and I'm glad. Like, it's been cool to kind of see it evolve. But it's also been pretty, yeah, you start to learn to manage your expectations pretty quick once these guys come out of the woodwork. So
That makes sense. With the raw lifting, versus the I guess strap lifting, or I can't remember what it's exactly
it's like
called.
multi-ply or single-ply.
Yeah. Is there quite massive strength difference between both those, or is it
Yeah,
pretty
so
small?
I don't know much about multi-ply. It's basically, I think, just more layers. So
Okay.
single-ply, it's like you can wear like a squat suit that's like
Yeah.
very compressive. Um, and it basically it kind of makes it difficult to bend certain joints. You know, it's like wearing like a really tight, and actually the some of the original multi-ply I believe was like denim, you know, like
Yeah.
back in the day. So I mean, you can imagine like lifting in jeans or something, like how,
Yeah.
you know, it's like it provides a little bit of assistance, you know, in terms of, you know, extending the leg. So and I've never lifted in equipment, so I'm not going to pretend to. I mean, there is like a large skill element to that. Like, I know a lot of people think, oh, you're automatically stronger, but it's executing the lifts. Like, there's different cues that people use, you know, when they use like a bench shirt. To kind of, you know, you see the guys walk out and their arms are kind of extended already, you know, and so it's um but I would say yeah, the numbers are pretty, can be pretty significantly different between the two, especially on bench.
Yeah.
Deadlift, it seems like there's a smaller gap there than on squat and bench. Um, but squats, yeah, with knee wraps and a squat suit on, like it's can lift considerably more if you know what you're doing.
That makes sense. I remember trying knee wraps. I don't know, it's got to be like 8 years ago, like just with a
Mm-hmm.
buddy of mine, just wrapping around super tight. And yeah, it feels so weird to
Yeah,
squat in that. Like,
it's weird. I've never in those meets, it's like they really like crank down on those things. Like the way like the average like gym bro wraps their knees, you know, it's like they have help, you know, they have someone there helping them wrap their knees and like pulling on it as hard as they can. So it's, and then immediately it's like they finish and people rush to them to like take them off so they can like blood can circulate again. So
yeah.
but yeah, I mean, I think it's cool. It's a very niche division of the sport now. I mean, that's kind of how the sport originated, but I mean, there's certainly more raw lifters than there are equipped at this point.
That makes sense. Yeah.
What about have you thought about or have you done more like have you done like a game day coach, like be there for an athlete on
Yeah,
the day they meet?
I have.
And there's just a side question because I've just, we're listening to another episode where they had Matt Gary on,
Mm-hmm.
and he's I don't know, I honestly not really heard of him since I'm not really part of, being powerlifting much.
Mm-hmm.
But he's a very well known game day coach,
Yeah.
and he was speaking about what is that called, protesting. after a lift?
Yeah, you can. There's like a jury. Like you can get a ruling overturned. I forget what the specific criteria need to be for that. I think it. I want to say if it's 2 reds. I think it might only be if there's 2 reds rather than 3. So there's 3 judges. There's 2 side judges and 1 head judge that gives the commands. And so each judge is kind of looking at their specific, like they have tasks that they're looking for, you know. And so, you could, like, if your butt lifted up, a little bit on one side, but the head judge didn't see it and the other side judge did, then I mean you could pass a lift because you only get a red from the one side. But there are situations in meets where you can, the coach can can protest the ruling and go, and then there's like a second kind of team of judges. Usually they're kind of off to the side that convene, and then they may overturn the ruling. It doesn't happen very often. I mean, you'll see it at like big meets. You rarely see it at like local meets. Well, one, there's not really a jury at local meets, but like at these international meets, it's you'll see it more because there's a lot more on the line, and so like there's a huge meet, Sheffield, that's happening here on Saturday in the UK, and I mean I'm sure that'll occur at least a handful of times during that if there's questionable calls. But yeah, Matt's somebody I've always, looked up to, with his, he's a great person first and foremost, but he's one of like the OG powerlifting coaches, and him and his wife, Susie Gary, they have been doing game day coaching for a long time. I think that's probably what they're known the most for, but, they're both, very knowledgeable on the programming side too. So, but I want to say Matt had kind of collected a bunch of data, from international meets and sort of looked at, kind of did some number crunching and, kind of came up with like, okay, people that tend to place the highest are kind of in these ranges for their openers, relative to their max. And so, and I mean, some of his stuff, I do want to get his new book because he has like a new game day coaching book that is supposed to be great. But like I know usually, and I don't want to misquote him, but from what I remember, he's, usually the opener is somewhere around like 90 to 92% of a max. So what that usually comes out for most people, and this is kind of how I try to look at it, is like your opener should be something you could triple like easily. Not easily, but like even on your worst day, you could triple it, and by definition, it's like a 7.5 is like, I might have been able to do, 3 more reps. So it's like a pretty, good moving triple. And then second attempts, usually it's like 95 to 97-ish. That's usually comes out to about like an RPE 9. So something where, you could double it if you had to. And it would be a tough double, but you could double it. And then third attempts, are usually, sometimes depending on what the athlete's trying to do, some people will, I mean, a lot of like younger competitors, or I should say like novice powerlifters, they sometimes sort of miss the objective. It's like, okay, I'm trying to total as much as I possibly can here, and that's what matters. But there are people that go into meets like just wanting to PR, and so that's usually the attempt to do it. And then you see people that open way too heavy, miss their first lift on depth or something, and or on bench they can't get it off their lock it out or something, whatever, or they might bobble the weight on a deadlift. And so in powerlifting, you have to retake a missed attempt. Or I should say you can go up if you want. And you'll see that some at like international, like high level meets where maybe a lifter missed a lift just due to an execution error, but the strength was there. You might see somebody go up in weight, but you can't go down in weight once you put in an attempt. So if you're stapled on your opener because of it being too heavy and you're not strong enough on that day to do it, then that's going to be a problem, So people, I mean, usually people will, try to fight through the second or third. And like sometimes you'll see just ridiculous efforts that they pull it off. But, opening too heavy is nobody ever intends to do it. And I think it happens to everybody every now and then. But yeah, if you bomb, that's called bombing out. Like if you don't get a lift of your 3, then you're out of the meet. Like you can't get a total. And in most meets, I don't know if they let you on the international level, but I think in most like local meets, you can still finish the meet. You just won't get a score for it, basically. So that's an unfortunate situation to see unfold. But I think Matt's approach is like get on the board and then build your total. Like you don't want to be like going 100% on your first attempt and risk missing it or not really being able to assess where your strength is on the day. And so sometimes, like for me, if we have a planned opener and they just smoke it and it's like less than a 7 RPE, then we'll go past what our like planned second was. And so it has to, like with game day coaching, what Matt's so good at is making those calls, knowing the lifter, where they're basically what they have in the tank based off of how the bar moves. Because some people, like, bar speed isn't always a great indicator for like what people have left in the tank. Like there's a masters lifter, I want to say he might be 60 now, Dave Ricks, and he's like a legend in the sport in like the, I think, 93 kilo class. But all of his lifts, I think he's might have hit 700 before, but all of his squats, his opener, his second, and his third, all seem like they're the same speed, but he goes up every time. So it's there's going to be people that can really like get in that low gear, and that's just kind of like the only gear they have. And so but yeah, and then there's for most people though, looking at bar speed, and if you kind of know what their max effort looks like, then you can make a reasonable judgment. But and then another thing Matt's really good at is just knowing the rules like inside out. Knowing, like, you'll see people like on their third deadlift, for example, kind of like jockeying for position. You can change your third deadlift attempt after you put it in. So they might put in like a bluff attempt to try to get the person that's behind them to take a larger jump than maybe they would have. And so there's things like that. So there's a lot of strategy involved. And like you go to a high level meet in in the back area during the third deadlifts, it's pretty fun. It's like there's just a lot of strategy and number crunching going on. So it's cool. I like that there's that aspect of it.
Does anybody ever just put like a ridiculous number for their third attempt and then just bring it way down?
Yeah, I mean you'll see that where it's like an obvious bluff. Like you'll see that every now and then you'll see people that like don't realize it, and they'll put in a higher number and go out there and not break the floor, and then the person then might change their deadlift down, just go up 2.5 kilos or something, something to secure the win. So it's there's a lot to kind of know about the rules and be able to think on your feet. And that's something like Matt is exceptional at. And I mean, you talk to really anybody in the sport, like everyone's gonna, like he's like the ultimate game day coach. So he's great at it.
That makes sense. With the RP of the first lift, like, do you typically want to have it around like a 7 RPE so you don't like accumulate too much fatigue going into your third attempt?
Yeah, so I like it to be about a 7.5. And granted, I mean, like some people aren't great at assessing that, but usually, yeah, you want to be able to build towards your potential max effort. Because if you don't, it's like, I mean, say you're capable of squatting 500 pounds on your opener, you put in 500 pounds and you get it, like that's great. Like you don't really have anywhere to go, but you can keep that number. That's what you were capable of. But it's better, like, what if you miss, and so that's the problem. So it's making strategic jumps, and you'll see, like, for the most part, I think people generally open in similar kind of realms, like kind of low 90s, mid 90s for the second, and then 100, or they might set a PR attempt or something like that. So
interesting.
Maybe individuals that did bodybuilding for a while, and then they maybe come to you, let's say me, right? I did ask you about this question about, hey man, do you think I should do a meet for just bench only, because my shit and my squat and deadlifts is just shit.
Do I see people come across from bodybuilding?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that would be kind of my preferred demographic to get into the sport, to be honest, because you see a lot of I think a lot of like younger lifters now that are drawn to powerlifting, they see like, you know, a strong lifter on social media and they want to train similar to them, but oftentimes those lifters have like built the foundation of, you know, with hypertrophy, you know, that's ultimately helping them, you know, express strength to a much larger degree. So um but like if somebody came to me, and I think I mentioned this on a while back or maybe a different podcast, but if someone came to me and said, you know, I want to get as strong as possible in the shortest amount of time, like it wouldn't be a lot of bodybuilding work. But if someone said, I want to be as strong as possible in 3 years, then a lot of, you know, and they were just starting out, you know, a lot of that stuff would be focused on hypertrophy. So it's, you know, all things equal, you know, a larger muscle fiber will produce more force. And so the key is like all things equal. So you take, you know, a IFBB bodybuilder who's, you know, done Smith machine squats, RDLs, and dumbbell press, like they're not going to be nearly like they're probably going to be freakishly strong anyway, even though they're not super proficient in those lifts. But if you put them on like a powerlifting program, you know, that has enough volume to like maintain the, you know, reasonable amount of muscle that they have, then most of them are going to be extremely strong.
I would say like, so for like the person that's transition or like wanting to compete in powerlifting, like in like the 3 years, like would you say like 75% of the training would be more like in the hypertrophy range and then 25 would be in the strength range, or would you
Yeah.
think 50?
Yeah. I mean, I think roughly, maybe 2/3 or so. And I think a lot of it is kind of front loading a lot of the development work. So I might, you know, give somebody like, I want them to know how to do the big three. And so usually, you know, even with, you know, long-term powerlifting, you know, you're still doing the big three further away from a meet, like if your block is focusing on development, you know. Um so I think with that, like there's still, you know, the big three sprinkled in early on, but like just to build and kind of maintain adequate proficiency. And then as the meet approaches, you know, intensity and the relative volume contribution of those main lifts will usually go up in relation to the others. But you know, there is a very high technical component to, you know, well, I shouldn't say very high. There's certainly like Olympic weightlifting is much more technical, I'd say. But I mean, even high level lifters, you know, can benefit from, I think, some hypertrophy work and kind of backing off just a bit, but it's not like this radical swing, you know, it's just, you know, maybe trading out a third of their volume and doing more accessory work. Because you know, maintaining adequate, you know, especially at those later stages, it's like you're not going to be putting on a ton of muscle as an advanced athlete, but I think those phases are still valuable from a longevity perspective, because the alternative would be like, okay, I'm just going to train at maintenance volume for hypertrophy and just push intensity and just try to exhaust, you know, avenues of adaptation through, you know, neurological means, you know, increased coordination and things like that, and, you know, neural drive. And I mean, that's why like heavy weights are more beneficial for strength for the most part. So, but you don't want to be like redlining intensity year round. So a lot of, you know, even advanced powerlifters will, you know, they'll pull back some on intensity, reps will come up, they might include some more accessory work, but they still keep like a decent pulse on, you know, the big three. And so the same principle applies. It's just kind of shifting the amounts a little bit, you know, between a novice and an advanced athlete. And the role of the hypertrophy phase for a novice is more so, okay, let's build a bigger engine here, you know, whereas for an advanced powerlifter, it's like, okay, let's give your body a break from like peak intensities, you know, see if we can develop a little bit, but we don't want to abandon, you know, proficiency in the lifts for the sake of an extra 8 ounces of skeletal muscle across your whole body, you know. So it's yeah, just kind of managing wear and tear. I think there's a case for just pulling back on intensity in that regard for advanced lifters when they're further away from a meet. But you know, a lot of them still compete 3-4 times a year. So, you know, there's those periods of time have been a little bit more, they're more sparse than it would be for like someone like me who's taken, you know, 7 years since they competed, or actually 6 years. So, you know, for me, it's like I felt okay about backing off of those movements for a while, because I didn't really do them in my last prep after that meet. Like I was like, okay, these are not the best tools for the job, to finish this prep. And I knew that going in, but since then it's like I've kept them in, but like the ultimate theme has been hypertrophy.
That makes sense. For like fatigue management, like even like after like once you finish a show, do you have like a time or like a month block where you kind of just tone back on intensity and tone back on volume just to kind of
Yeah.
recover and then kind of go into another phase?
Yeah, usually. I mean, for the most part, it really depends on the situation. Like you'll have lifters that might have meets, like say they have a qualifying meet that they have to do that's a month before their main event. So, and sometimes that situation happens. And so for them, not so much, but you know, it's you at that point you kind of have to prioritize like, okay, which one of these do I want to kind of empty the tank on in terms of peaking strategies? And knowing that like, okay, we might not be able to replicate this back to back. And so sometimes that first meet might come off of a volume block or something like that. And then you might peak between the meets, or do a more like dedicated peak. So yeah, there's a lot of ways to go about it. But say someone is competing twice a year, which is kind of about what I used to average, I'd say. They would, I would take, a good month. I might do the main lifts once a week, but it was pulling back, for joints, just psychologically, it was nice to take a break. And then, kind of ramp back up with a little bit more structure.
Okay. For how many meets would you say is like a good number to have like per year? Like, do you find going more than 2 or 3 meets is probably a little bit too much and you may have a risk of injury if you're going like more
I mean, I think it's very context dependent. I know that's kind of a cop-out answer, but now with the way the federations are, like USAPL is no longer an IPF affiliate. And so like Powerlifting America is now the IPF affiliate. And so a lot of competitors are kind of testing the waters on both sides. Like, okay, which route do I want to go here? And sometimes they'll do one meet and then go and do, a meet from the other side. But I think it's, I mean, if the lifter is fragile, if they're susceptible to, if they have an injury history, then yeah, I mean, powerlifting isn't like inherently dangerous, I wouldn't say. Like the injury rates, are still reasonably low, but there is something, I think, at least mentally, like getting under heavy weight on a regular basis it's grueling. And I think that's the biggest thing is like just giving yourself like the best feeling in the world is like after a meet when you go to the gym and like actually get a pump again. You're like, oh, this is awesome. Like I forgot about this. And so I think it just kind of keeps you stimulated mentally with the training. But I think for the most part, I think for like the top end powerlifters, 3 to 4 times a year is kind of expected. Or I shouldn't say expected, but kind of it's not abnormal at all. And I think for first time, like early competitors, I think a case can also be made to compete a little bit more regularly once they start competing, just for the experience, because you'll have strong athletes that miss the commands, like because there's a head judge that gives like like press commands on the bench, like you have to pause your bench, and so people who haven't been through it before sometimes jump the commands. There's just too much to think about for the first meet, and so there's a lot that can be overlooked, and you'll still see high level athletes that are jump commands or not hit depth or not lock out their deadlift completely, and so or let it down before they get the down command, and so stuff like that. It's just good to kind of get meet experience to kind of build that meet day composure for people. But really on paper it's like the longer outside of the experience and maintaining that kind of proficiency on meet day, I think a case could be made like longer breaks between meets, certainly provide more opportunity for improvement, especially once you're kind of in that intermediate sort of stage. You have the competition experience, but you still have muscle that you can, pack on that's, there for the taking. If you put the time in, then, I mean, I think twice a year is probably fine. But then again, I mean, there's shit, I haven't competed in 6 years, so it's not, and that's not because I'm like trying to like build up this beastly total, but I think for me, it's like I was just kind of a little bit burned out on it, and I've gotten the itch more the past year and a half, and So I'm hoping like the bodybuilding work in the meantime is going to pay off once I ramp things up to a higher degree.
Nice.
Yeah. Though there's a question that I wanted to jump back to, that when we were first talking about the advanced lifters versus novice lifters that you've mentioned, where novice lifters, you would highly recommend them to their programming would be mainly of hypertrophy based, to pack on a little bit more muscle so they can actually eventually get stronger, to make their lifts a little bit more efficient. Everything there makes sense. And then advanced lifters, you tend to see a little bit less muscle that's required, since they've been doing it a little bit longer. So this actually got me to think about the question on, because I know it's going to be relevant for yourself and myself. Brandon, you're very far away. You're still a little boy. The question is, I know that hypertrophy is going to be it's going to be a training program for when age ramps up. It's going to be like a maintenance for a lot of individuals. Hypertrophy training, just to get yourself in the gym, so you just maintain that muscle mass instead of like gaining. And the more advanced you get, as you said, like it's going to be a lot more slower, or even you're not even going to see much muscle gain. So what would you be your perspective on individuals who may have been lifting for, let's say, 10 years for hypertrophy? Now they're in a stage where they're just maintaining, and then but they've been working, they've been doing hypertrophy training for so long. Would it be ideal for them in an older age to actually start powerlifting?
I don't think the powerlifting will do anything to like potentiate hypertrophy necessarily. And I also think like, I think you threw out sort of an arbitrary number, but like 10 years is still like that's still early on in a training career, I'd say. Or at least not at the tail end of it. It depends on when somebody starts, but I mean, if you start as a teenager, that's like, look at someone like Jeff. Jeff's made progress like into his 50s, so I think it's for like someone who's just only focused on hypertrophy, like they don't really care about the strength, which I think, probably they don't care about their 1RM so much. I think that's probably the majority of athletes, that are kind of in the physique realm. Like they're still going to be able to make progress. And I think the goal should still be like, don't accept like, okay, now I'm just maintaining, it's like you can't force progression. I've talked about that, a lot, but I think you're kind of, self-limiting. It's self-limiting to think like, okay, now I'm just on maintenance volume for the rest of my lifting career, because, the gains will still come. It's just, they are slower. I mean, Berto is another really good example. He made some fantastic progress with his back, in 4 years, and he just turned 40, so it's, there's definitely an opportunity to still progress there. But I don't think, like, unless they're just bored of hypertrophy training and they want to try powerlifting, then, I mean, if they've been training that long and their, joints are feeling good and they're healthy, they probably make pretty good powerlifters once they got used to it, and once they got in the groove of the main lifts. But I never really program like high intensity work for bodybuilders, strict, only bodybuilders, unless they just have like a secondary interest for that.
Makes sense.
Because I did think about it. Yeah, I literally did think about it. You're just like, yeah, just do your bench only.
No, I mean, I think that it'd be fun. I mean, there's nothing wrong with it. And I think there is something to be said for, I think a lot of people look at it like, okay, what's the opportunity cost of doing like a meet prep? People like in your shoes, Adrian. It's like, okay, how much size am I going to miss out on? How much hypertrophy gains am I going to miss out on by committing to this for 3 or 4 months? And I think it's pretty minimal. And they've shown in research, like people can take multiple weeks off and, and come back to training, and they see like an accelerate, like they end up at the same point after, like, I think it's a 16-week period. I'm kind of laughing because I was trying to explain this study in one of our podcasts, and I don't remember the name of the study, but it was a study where they had groups. One group trained all the way through, and I want to say maybe it was 16. It might have been 32 weeks. I can't remember, but one group trained all the way through, and then I believe the other group, it was like 3 weeks on, 3 weeks off, 3 weeks on, 3 weeks off, or something to that effect. Like there was a number of weeks off within that same time frame. And what they found was that by the end, like both groups had similar gains. And so I think what that can kind of tell us is that, you know, like would a peaking block for a powerlifting meet really be any different than that? You know, if you resensitize yourself to the stimulus to some extent during that period, like you know, could be at the same point by the end regardless, and now you have a meet under your belt in that experience, you know. So I think people, like the fear of missing out on hypertrophy for the sake of doing a meet, I think limits some competitors from, you know, testing the waters and trying it. But in the grand scheme of things, it's like worst case scenario. Okay, let's say you maintain your muscle. Let's say absolute worst case, you lose a little bit, which usually wouldn't happen. But say you maintain your muscle and you lost out on like 12 weeks of potential hypertrophy. You know, it's like, if you're in the long haul for this, like that's nothing, you know. And chances are, based off the research that we have available, is once you return to the higher volumes, you're going to get a good response from it, and you're going to kind of catch back up. So
that makes sense. I got one question for you too. Like with the new rule change for benching, like what are your thoughts on that? Where now there's like I think your arm has to go below your shoulder or something like that.
I think it's, I mean, I understand why it was put in place. I think it's the elbow has to be below the shoulder. And I'm not a huge fan of the rule because I think it's very hard to judge like very quickly. It's just like a snapshot, you know, that the judges have to have. But it does, I have mixed opinions about it because I understand the situation they're trying to resolve. And that's I guess what a perceived issue of like, okay, these very high arch benchers, you know, you'll see like some female benchers that, you know, it's like 1.5 inch range of motion, you know, that just contort themselves. And so like, I get, you look at that, you're like, that's not a bench, but part of me also, a big part of me looks at that and it's like, they've just optimized their abilities within the confines of the sport. You know, it's like, it's sort of like telling a tall basketball player that they're cheating, you know? So, and there's a technical component to doing that. Like people can't just hop on a bench if they have that mobility or the potential for that mobility and bench, you know, 350 pounds, you know, as a female or something like that. Like it's not going to happen. So, so it's there is a skill element to being able to get to that point. And I think as long as the rules allow for it, like I never had any issue with it. But I do think like, yeah, you're looking more at like muscular strength by changing the rule a little bit, like actual force production rather than like it's taking the mechanical advantages out of it to some degree. But ultimately, like all the lifts are influenced by that. So, I mean, if you have really long arms on a deadlift, you know, the range of motion is going to be really short, you know, so it's, I don't know. I think that rule in particular, I would have liked to, I mean, there's really no other way to, I guess, judge it in the moment, unless you're like comparing two heights of different joints. But there's a lot of people that like I would look at them benching and think like that's a respectable bench. Like that's not like it's not a bench that would get a lot of heat on the internet. I'll say that, you know, it's like where, oh, this person, like, what is that, you know? But even that they aren't meeting the standard, you know? So it's almost in, you know, there's limb lengths there play a role. You know, if you have, you know, really long, you know, humerus, then I mean that's going to be disadvantageous there too, you know. So it's going to yeah, I think it's sort of solving one problem and maybe creating others. So I don't think that's it's certainly not a wide, like the universally accepted solution to the problem. I would rather see something like grip width get adjusted. Like there's, you know, relative to, and I don't know how they would go about doing this, but like relative to somebody's weight class or, you know, something, you know, because some people have to grab it really wide, you know, if they might not have the, you know, like super heavyweights or something like that, you know, they might have to grab it wider. But I think that would make more sense to me. But that would also be kind of hard to, I think, regulate to some degree.
That makes sense. So is there just somebody kind of looking right on the side of them?
Yeah, I
Just
believe the head judges. That's a good question. I don't know which judge is responsible. I would assume the head judge is responsible because when you're benching, they would be like
Right on
your
top of the
head would
head.
be towards them.
okay.
Yeah. So they would have the clearest view of that. But I don't know if the side judges actually have any input on that or not. I guess I don't really see how they could since they don't have the angle on it. And they're probably paying attention more to like butt staying on the bench,
Yeah.
feet staying flat and things like that.
Cool. Wow. I've actually enjoyed a lot more of those other questions that wasn't on the agenda.
That's okay.
But yeah, it gives me a lot more insights on potentially if some of our athletes come to us and says like, hey, maybe we could do, maybe like, I was thinking about doing a meet, and then I'll probably say, yeah, go talk to Brian. He's great. He's gonna be there for you. He's gonna tell you all about the good stuff.
Yeah.
But for let's say just maybe like we talked about fatigue management. We've talked about like your transition from bodybuilder to powerlifter. So like you like to preach. You would recommend this way. We've talked about some a little bit. We touched a little bit on some programming strategies for that as well. I think you touched a little bit on that. But let's do a case study right now. I think we talked about it a little bit in one of our check-ins. Say like, let's say I was planning to do, say, hey Brian, I'm gonna do I'm gonna try out just a bench only because I don't think my squat and dead would be able to catch up on time to make a total. So if I were to tell you like this right now, and my next competition for bodybuilding is 2025, what would you give me a time frame? What is a good time frame for me to prepare for, and what would my program would probably potentially look like?
I mean, I think you could make solid progress in as little as 8 to 12 weeks if we went on the higher frequency specific. Like for you, since we don't barbell bench, like it's like that would be a good start, Adrian. Like, let's start the movement in question. But yeah, getting transitioning to more volume there. So for you, like increasing that, I think would be like maybe start with 2 days a week doing barbell bench, work our way up to 3, and I think in 8 to 12 weeks you would see a significant improvement in your max. And that's, I mean, a lot of that's kind of like, I mean, you're an experienced trainee, but it's like you're not experienced with the high intensity side of things, so you would kind of get like newbie gains there to some extent on the coordinated aspect of generating force with that movement. So but I think if I were given the option, like having like a 16-week runway to kind of build, and it would give me more time to sort of see how things are going. There's just more margin of error there in case we have to make adjustments or something's just simply not working. But it kind of goes back to originally the question, if I took somebody who's got very minimal experience in the gym and they're like, okay, I'm doing this meet in 4 weeks and like I've never worked with them before, then I first want to see their squat, bench, and deadlift, see what it looks like, see that's like, okay, do we need to just get baseline technique intact first, which would probably be the case before we start ramping up loading. So I would focus on that first, and then probably just push some higher intensity work for a few weeks, and then just a short taper maybe into the meet. But that's not like the ideal situation. But in those cases, like high intensities are going to make a big impact in a short period of time, whereas if you have a longer period of time, like you can train other adaptations that are contributing to strength, like hypertrophy. So that's why the longer timelines can be helpful. But I think, you still see high level powerlifters now that are, refining the technical side of things and making the lift more efficient for their, leverages and things like that. So, so the technique refinement, that's like an ongoing process. It's not like once you learn the lift, you're done. Like there's a minimum effective dose for maintaining that skill set for sure with those athletes as well. But yeah, if we said, okay, Adrian, you're going to compete in 4 weeks, like we would start benching today, you know, and doing probably bench 2 to 3 times a week. And just, you know, starting out moderately heavy, but not so heavy where like I would want to make sure you were doing the lifts in a safe manner before, you know, and like hitting, you know, or like true pauses on a bench, or, you know, if it's a squat, like actually hitting depth on a squat for somebody, or, you know, not hitching on a deadlift. Because a lot of people, they have these maxes in their mind of like, okay, this is what my max is. But then once you put them to like comp standard, it's, you know, you can take 10, 15 pounds off of it, you know, because sometimes it's just like gym lifts and meet lifts aren't, you know, held to the same scrutiny.
What is the typical pause for the bench?
Usually it's
About a
like
second?
1 second.
Yeah, about a
Yeah,
second.
usually, and you'll get some judges that are more forgiving than others. I mean, it's kind of funny when you go to meets, it's like, you know, the first people that compete are, you know, usually kind of like the guinea pigs for some of the judges. And it's like, you know, word kind of spreads like the head judging here is tough, you know, and so then, you know, okay, maybe I should pull back my opener a little bit, since like the last meet that I did at the Arnold was 2 meets ago. I remember the pause lengths. Like I wanted to bench 400 in that meet, and I think I could have. But I remember the pauses there were, they felt like 2.5 seconds, you know. So, and they like the start commands were long. Like you would, because once you unrack it and you kind of, you know, you have your elbows unlocked and everything's set, then you'll get a start command. Then you come down, you pause, has to be completely still. Then they'll give you a press command. But it just felt like all of these commands, like everyone at that meet was like
Fried.
performing below their expectations on bench, and that's just kind of the nature of it. So, but then you'll have meets where, you know, especially like at local levels where the judging's a little bit like, it's not ideal that there's a discrepancy there, but when you're dealing with human beings, there's not going to be consistency all the time.
Brandon, is there anything else that you wanted to ask him while we have him here?
I think that's pretty much it. Yeah, that's great insight on powerlifting, because I've always potentially thought about doing it, but I ended up getting patellar tendonitis like 3 years ago on my knee, and then that kind of lasted for like 8 months. So
Yeah,
never ended up going down that road, but
yeah,
still potentially thinking maybe in the future, in the next like 2 years, like depending on how bodybuilding goes for me. But yeah, we'll
yeah.
see.
No, it'd be fun. I think if anything, it's like if you're interested at all in it, like, I mean, you don't have to do a full blown meet like 16-week prep in order to get the meet day experience. You know, technically you could go in and sign up for a meet and just get the experience of like the commands and like see like, is this even something I want to allocate time preparing for? You know, and
Yeah.
so I mean, there's always that option too, but like I wouldn't recommend that for a bodybuilder. You know, it's like just go do a show. Like you don't have to prepare for it. But for someone who's like on the fence, like, okay, do I want to start training this way? You know, like, yeah, the preference would be to train that way and compete. But if you're like, I'm unsure if I even want to do this. Like I did a good example of this. I did a strongman competition in like 2013 on a whim. Like I decided the day before, like this kid at my gym was like, come do this strongman competition with me. And I'm like, okay. And I mean, that's like the equivalent of what I'm saying. And so I don't recommend doing that, but it wouldn't be the end of the world. What it did, like the objective was met, and that I realized like I have no interest in doing this shit. Like this isn't something I want to spend time training for. But it was a mess. Like it was humbling for sure. Like the keg toss, that was a disaster. But
Is it with that sport? Isn't there more injuries in that sport compared to powerlifting, like the
you
strongman
know,
stuff?
I don't know. I would, if I had to guess, probably yes. Like I know, like there's not technique rules for that, you know,
Yeah.
and like there's some like the stones, like the Atlas stones, like rolling them up onto your quads and kind of standing up with it. It's like there's a lot of like flexion under load there, you know. So it's, you know, whatever, however you think about it, like you're putting yourself in some awkward positions doing that. And so, and I would imagine, you know, with experience, like the injury risk goes down to some extent, but at the same time, you're stronger. So it's like any, you know, deviation might have more significant consequences since you are stronger. But yeah, for me, it was fun. I guess looking back at it, it was fun. Like it was a fun memory, but it wasn't, in the moment, it was kind of humiliating. So,
I guess it's probably like a capacity, right? Like if you can handle load inflection with a certain amount, you just slowly increase over time.
I would imagine, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, but yeah, if you're not used to doing it,
Yeah.
like you put yourself in that position, it's like telling someone to deadlift, something that they have the muscle to do, but they've never deadlifted before.
Yeah.
It's like you wouldn't do that because there's a large degree of injury risk there if they, if the bar gets in front. Like there's just a lot of mechanics that can go wrong if you have no idea, if you've never done the movement. So, but if you did this, I guess to sort of edit my recommendation there, it would be like, make sure you at least know how to do the lifts for powerlifting, and then you could go in, which I'm sure you have experience with. So, yeah, I don't think you would need to do like a full blown, long drawn out meet prep in order to do it. Because you may find you don't like it, then and so yeah.
Yeah, sweet.
So
No,
honestly,
that's
try it.
awesome.
Yeah, I am actually seriously, after speaking with you today, I would actually seriously consider it just to experience it.
I think you should do a full meet though.
Yeah.
With my shitty legs and my messed up knee.
Well, wait, I mean, you can. I mean, the only place to go for those numbers is up, though, right? Like you would get stronger in those too. So, but yeah, if your knee's jacked up and everything hurts there, it doesn't make
the left knee is getting better. Yeah, the left knee is honestly getting better, and then I can now feel that my glutes are super weak from it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so now I'm just accessorizing like single leg hip thrust and just to like keep up the strength.
Yeah.
But it eventually will, when I'm mentally ready for it, then you'll know.
All right, sounds good.
Yeah. But is there anything else that you wanted to add before we close out?
No, thanks. Yeah, thanks so much for hopping on, Brian.
Okay.
Yeah, of course.
Yes, thank you again, Brian, so much. We appreciate your time here with us and sharing your experiences with our audience. Where could we find you?
3DMJ, at 3DMJ, at Team 3DMJ, I think it is. And then my Instagram's at BD Minor.
Yeah, we'll share all those information down in the links below. And if you guys are interested in more powerlifting tips and recommendations, please feel free to reach out to us or even Brian himself. I think he's, you open to taking more athletes to meet?
Yeah, I have a little bit of that right now.
All right. Yeah. So he's a little bit more space left. So you guys, if you want to sign up, go ahead and reach out to him. We'll be here every single week or every single other week as, Brandon is getting ready for his show. So he's going to be traveling a bit. But again, thank you guys for tuning in. If you guys like our videos or our podcast, please leave us a rating. Usually people leave around 5-star ratings here. And then if any comments, please leave us in our comment section below. Please like and subscribe our YouTube channel. Thank you guys so much again. We'll see you guys next time.
Thanks for having me.